And now, please welcome Bloomberg News reporter Margi Murphy and Chief Analyst Mandiant Intelligence, Google Cloud, John Hultquist.
Hello, and hi, John.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
For anyone who doesn't know, John has a background as a senior intelligence analyst in the US government, but has spent more than a decade in the private sector, leading analysts who are reporting on global cybersecurity threats for your Fortune 500 and government agency clients. John, can you tell us why threat intelligence is so important when it comes to securing these kind of organizations?
Yeah, I think we've known this for a long time in the government space, the importance of intelligence. And I have a military background, and it's super important in the military. We've always recognized that. And I think probably a good example from my background is I grew up. I was one of the very first people to deploy overseas. After or in the early 2000s, and we were basically a military that was built to fight a different kind of war. We were, essentially designed to, roll tanks and do a really quick operation, and it just wasn't the right. We weren't doing the right things, and I think it's really important because, when it comes to the security space, we have best practices which we should be doing, and we are often sort of buying, talking to vendors and buying new things, but you can't do any of that right unless you're asking who the adversary is and what they're up to, right? If you don't know what the adversary is up to, you've got no clue, how to risk manage, right? And that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to make better decisions with limited resources. And if you are trying to marshal those resources, you need to have some idea of who's going to be on the other side of the game. And I think that's why it's so important.
With that in mind, we're less than 2 months away from the US general election. And it's no surprise that foreign adversaries may be circling. Are there any threat groups that you're particularly concerned about? What are the ones to watch?
We're actually, concerned about a number of different threats from a number of different countries. Really, I would say that the regions that we're most concerned about threats coming from, or we've seen them come from so far, are China, Russia, and Iran, right? And I think most people have some experience with the Russian threat. The threat that we're seeing from China is interesting. It's very information operations focused. So real focus on sort of the troll farm activity in the social media space. The bad news is that they are, doing some interesting things like using AI. We can see them trying to put people on the streets as far as demonstrations. They're literally paying people to protest in front of the White House. The good news is nobody is reading this stuff. The good news is that everybody wants to be an influencer, right? It's actually a really competitive space, and we have to keep in mind that these actors are trying to be influencers. They come from outside the culture they're trying to talk to, and they're doing all this while trying not to get caught, and that's really, really hard to do. So even though they're out there, they're really not as effective as I'm sure they want to be.
And there's been one particularly interesting incident, which is the Trump's campaign incident, an Iranian hack and leak operation. Can you tell us a little bit about the mechanics of a hack and leak operation and why this particular incident is so concerning?
Sure. Well, a hack and leak is essentially an intrusion operation into usually they're going after emails or documents, and for the most part, it looks like every espionage operation that we look into. Right, these actors are gaining access to sensitive documents. Usually they use that to inform themselves. But if they get something that they might think is juicy or could have sort of an effect, an information operations effect, they can share that out into the world. APT42, who's been in the news lately for this type of thing, actually has a long history of targeting both sides of the aisle, right? In fact, last presidential cycle, we could see them targeting both sides of the aisle. This presidential cycle, we could see them targeting both sides of the aisle. The sort of what sort of is new for them, though, that we've not seen is the leaking aspect, and that's something we really anticipated, especially since in 2016 it was such an important operation.
Does that suggest a sophistication there, or a kind of evolving? Have they developed better skills in that sense?
I think that it may have been a target of opportunity. I think that's something that we have to consider. That they finally got their hands on something that they felt like they could potentially put in play. But we haven't seen the documents, so I don't really know the full story. And it's important to remember that these are spies, right? We're never going to know. Usually, we're never going to know the full story.
In 2023, you warned about a China-based state-sponsored group which was attacking critical infrastructure in the US and Guam. Earlier this year, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, also warned about this group. It's not uncommon for nation-states and adversaries to sit in each other's networks and try and gather intelligence. Why is this group, Volt Typhoon, so concerning, and what is their goal? What's their objective with this campaign?
Well, what's really concerning about this group is that they seem to be targeting critical infrastructure in preparation for disruption, right? So this is something that we have been seeing for a long time. It's something that we've seen Iran do and Russia do. The idea is you burrow into something, you burrow into sensitive systems, and you lay in wait until the right contingency comes along. And the reason you do that is if the contingency comes along, it's too late to do it, right? You have to do this in advance. And what's really weird about when we're talking about the really serious parts of the cyber war, you're actually always fighting it. You're fighting it in advance of the real war, right? Because you don't necessarily, it'll be too late when the real war to start thinking about these things. And so this actor has been digging into critical infrastructure for a couple of years now in the United States and some other places.
What kinds of, can you be more specific about the?
Well, generally, when we first found this actor, their focus was really around the military. And the discussion from, for instance, the NSA and CISA was they're digging into places where they could disrupt the ability for the military to mobilize. So one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the first thing that most military units do when they mobilize is they go to the railhead. And they move a lot of things by rail and then eventually to the ports, and that's how they mobilize. And so we can see targeting sort of consistent with that. We see targeting maritime space and rail. We can see it in we could see it in air travel as well, telecommunications in places where there are major military presence, and even targeting of water and power around military installations. Recently, though, the breadth of targeting has changed, right? And the nature of the targeting. It's been less military associated. And the concern is that maybe that the play here isn't just to disrupt a military response, but the play is to sort of create a major societal disruption. And why that matters to this audience is that if you're really looking to create a major societal disruption, you can afford to be way more choosy about your targets, right? You want to hit a lot of targets that are essentially things that will go down and maybe just get noticed, right? And that's what we're seeing more and more from this actor. Operations that don't seem as tied to that sort of military application. The other thing that's really important about this actor is that they are incredibly challenging. They're challenging the way that we are doing defense. It really reflects a bigger evolution from China in a lot of their activity. For instance, they're using 0 days. They're heavily relying on 0 days, particularly 0 days in security appliances and security devices. I think there have been like 6 of these 0 days so far this year. There were like a dozen last year. I expect another 6 before the year is out. I've got to tell you, this is not the same 0-day problem that we used to talk about. I used to tell people, look, you're probably not important enough for them to burn a 0-day on. But the reality is that these 0 days are getting a lot longer use. They're hitting a lot more targets. So a single 0 day, we were able to see a pretty good span of how much it was used, and it was used across the globe and for 9 months against hundreds of targets. So they're coming in through your edge quietly with a 0 day. They're moving through by living off the land. It means they're using less and less malware. That's, again, something that we have learned to sort of find actors, a way that we detect actors. They're breaking that ability. And they're breaking our ability to catch their command and control because they are using some innovative command and control methods. One of the things they're doing, for instance, is going out and compromising routers, SOHO routers, and leveraging for very short periods of time. So your network IOCs are less valuable. So less malware, less social engineering and spear phishing, less network IOCs. All those are the controls that we've come to rely on, and they're breaking a lot of that. And we've really got to up our game if we want to keep up with them. And
it's fair to say that that's a priority for Mandiant. You've been working on a lot of Vault Typhoon activity.
Yeah, we've got a lot of efforts around looking for this stuff, and we're having to get kind of innovative in the places we go to go find them, because they are a tougher problem, and that's really the intelligence advantage. You want to not only just sort of passively collect this stuff, but you have to go out and find these actors, right? You have to work for it.
Do you think that their cover's been blown, essentially? In some places, the Department of Justice announced that it had disrupted a botnet relating to the campaign. Are they retreating at all? How has their activity changed since we've been hearing more about them?
Well, so that's a good example. So a good example of a lot of disruptive efforts. I think disruptive efforts are really important. We have almost an ethical responsibility to consistently disrupt. But in a lot of cases, a lot of these actors are prepared to deal with it, right? The thing about those botnets is they're ephemeral. They're constantly changing the nodes out. And the reason they change those nodes out, right, is so to keep us on our toes. We can't find some IP address that we know about and then look for them forever. So when we see those disruptions, that's built into the plan, right? They're going to be constantly rebuilding. We believe that these are third parties, potentially contractors, that are building these botnets out for them. Multiple players are relying on them. And so they're in a really good position to sort of withstand that kind of pressure.
Right. And we know that nation states don't always want to just target critical infrastructure to wreak havoc. Sometimes they're determined to funnel money away from the US economy. We've seen a really inventive scheme recently, a case where North Korean workers were interviewing and being successfully recruited for remote jobs in the US. John, tell us why they were doing that.
Well, the biggest reason they're doing that is the North Korean state is starved for cash, right? And I'd say a few years ago, it feels like a few years ago, when they really started doing the bank heists, we saw this massive sudden transformation where they started using a lot of their talent, their technical talent, which they have a significant amount of, to raise funds for the regime through hacking and other schemes. The IT worker scheme is kind of bizarre. They are essentially getting jobs. These are North Koreans who are getting jobs in regular companies across the world. And these are in major companies. We're talking, hundreds of the Fortune 500 are being targeted. They're in critical infrastructure, and potentially in the defense industrial base, potentially in government contractors, even in government potentially, where these guys are getting access to. And for the most part, they are doing labor for money. That's the big part of the...
An honest day's work.
An honest day's work. The biggest fraudulent part of a lot of this work is that they are, not who they say they are. But otherwise, in many cases, they're actually doing an honest day's work.
And there's facilitators based in the US who are assisting with this, right? You've got people who are running laptop farms. Can you tell us a little bit?
That's right. So, big piece of this is how they get themselves hired and sort of run the interactions with the hiring organization. So, there actually been some raids recently. I think there was a college student in Tennessee who had, he was running a laptop farm. And so essentially what would happen is they would get themselves hired into an organization, and he would take receipt of the laptop and then plug it into the farm and then put on remote access tool. And so they could basically interact with the laptop remotely and do the job. Now, I say that they're doing the job. I should be careful here because that's not the case in every time, right? They are getting access. They are IT workers, right? And so they are essentially getting access to the IT backbones of these companies. And they are essentially in very sensitive places. They're also tied to the intelligence services. So we can see accesses that start with an IT worker, end with an intrusion team that we know is, for instance, RGB related, which is the Reconnaissance General Bureau, which is one of their major intelligence services.
Can you just break that down a little bit? So it starts with the IT worker.
So the IT worker gets the job. He may actually be doing, labor for money, but he slowly gains access to, say, an important target. Really, a place we've seen a ton of this is actually in the crypto industry, right? So they have some of these IT workers are actually crypto engineers. They have a lot of talent focused in that area. And so we'll see them get the job and they'll do work. But ultimately, they are gaining access to systems that they may want to compromise for, to actually get a major payout. So they'll bring in the intelligence services. The intelligence services also can collect intelligence and do some of their other missions there as well. We've even seen them do backdoors, for instance. So they're working on code. They may insert a backdoor into the code, and that gives them access for other means that they can leverage as well.
Do you have any intel on the scale of this, or is this problem going to continue even though we know about it?
They are potentially in like a large preponderance of the Fortune 500 companies moving through your recruiting system. Now, it doesn't mean they ultimately got hired, but they are in the first and second stages.
And how do you protect against that?
One of the biggest thing you can do is essentially do a thorough background check. There are a lot of background check outsourcers that can do stuff like this. Biometrics is an important part of a potential background check that I think is undervalued. One of the things that they're doing is they're leveraging a lot of AI to sort of adopt their fake identity documents. You can verify those things with you can look for AI altered documents. You can also send them to a notary, right? There's a process for checking those things as well that I think is a really important part of this. After the fact, you can monitor for remote access tools, which is exactly how an actor got caught recently. You can monitor for VPN use. VoIP use, and then a big piece of this is get them on camera, right? If you're going to hire somebody, get them on camera and talk to them. And even after the fact, spot checks might help you determine if this is going on as well.
And last question, because we're almost out of time, and I hate it to be another gloomy one, but we're coming off the back of a pretty intense summer of kind of back-to-back hacks. My colleagues have been super busy reporting on various incidents from Change Healthcare, CDK, all the Snowflake customers who were hit. To an outsider, it might look like all the gains that we've made in cybersecurity kind of crumbled against these financially motivated actors. What's going on, and how can we stop this from happening?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we're on the wrong side of this problem. It's not going the way we want it to. It is getting worse. And I think the really important thing that's at the root of this is the monetization problem, right? A lot of cybercrime for a long time was fraud, right? It was gaining access to data and then selling it in the underground. What's changed here is the ability of these actors to demand money directly through cryptocurrency, right? And that means that these actors can ask anybody to pay them, and that also means that they're going to consistently get more and more aggressive. And so I think we are going to be facing an uphill battle moving forward, and we're going to see these actors continue to adapt their means of sort of extorting victims over time, at least for the near future.
And on that happy note, we're at time. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you.